A few months ago, I was talking with my friend who is a coastal First Nations in British Columbia. He told me he was worried. I asked him why. And he said to me he was worried because the ocean was changing around him. I asked again, what were these changes? He said the oceans was warming up. He also saw animals that were unfamiliar in waters around him, and fishes that are traditionally important for them, such as salmon, are not doing really well. He also saw incidents of mass die-off of animals along the coast because they were suffocated from the lack of oxygen in the waters. For my friend and many other people who are living along the coast, their health and livelihood are inherently linked to the conditions of the oceans and ecosystem. Coastal indigenous people are strongly dependent on seafood. Their health would be substantially affected and at risk without access to the source of food. More broadly, in the world, more than 10% of the global population is dependent one way or another on seafood as part of their livelihood. The ocean also provides almost 3 million people with at least a fifth of their annual proteins intake. And all of us enjoy seafood and marine life as part of our culture. This includes my family, my parents in Hong Kong, as seafood and marine life is a big part of our culture. Therefore, with a changing ocean, it could have huge consequences to our society. But what are the causes of these changes in the ocean? How do these changes affect marine fish, fish stocks, and fisheries? And how this then affects the well-being of people? What are the solutions to this problem? My research attempts to answer these questions. I hope by now that you are all convinced human activities generate greenhouse gas by burning of fossil fuel that contribute to global warming. And that includes the ocean. Global warming also affects the way water moves in the oceans, as well as the biochemical reaction. And one of the consequences of this is that it will lead to a reduction in the amount of oxygen in water. Also, more carbon dioxide going into the seawater will make the ocean more acidic. Marine fish and many other marine life are very sensitive to these changing ocean conditions. For example, salmon would prefer to live in a certain range of temperature, and when temperature becomes too hot or too cold, their body functions will be affected. And when these changes are too big and that is prolonged for a longer period, the fish may die. And in fact, there are good evidence that the poor performance of many of the Pacific salmon stock in the British Columbian coast is partly because of the changing ocean temperature. My research attempts to collate information about the oceanography, the biology, the economics, as well as the other information about human well-being in order to elucidate how climate change is affecting marine ecosystems and our society. What we find is that these changes in the oceans are already affecting fish stocks and fisheries all around the world. We find that fisheries nowadays are catching more warmer water species compared to a few decades ago. And these changes is because of the warmer oceans in the last few decades. Also, marine species are changing their distributions by tens to hundreds of kilometers for every 10 years. And these changes tend to move towards the polar regions where marine life can find cooler waters to live when the oceans warms up. All of these changes would then affect our fisheries, because fisheries that are currently targeting salmon will be affected when salmon population decrease. At the same time, there are some new species, particularly those that are currently living in warmer waters, are occurring in our coast. For example, in British Columbia, we're going to see more Pacific salmon or market squid, where they used to occur in waters such as in California in the US. However, the fisheries in our coast do not catch these species, and there is no a substantial market to sell this market for now. This poses a substantial challenge for fisheries, and this challenge also will be the same for other fisheries around the world. Particularly in tropical waters, the challenges may be especially big. With the polar shift of the species and the other changes in ocean conditions in the tropical areas, such as the decrease in the amount of productivities in the ocean, our work suggests that the tropical area will be a hotspot of impacts from climate change, where species abundance will be largely reduced, and that species may tend to move away from the tropical waters, resulting in more than 50% decrease in their potential fisheries catches in many areas. And this is particularly worrying because many of the countries in the tropical areas are developing countries, and they are strongly dependent on seafood for their livelihood as well as for their nutritional intake. They also have lower capacity to deal with these changes in the oceans. Therefore, these countries may have the biggest impacts because of the climate change impacts on fish stocks and fisheries. The most effective way to deal with these challenges is to reduce our carbon dioxide emission. Right now, we have the Paris Agreement that provides countries a guidelines of what they can do in order to reduce global carbon emissions. And for us and for everybody in our society, we can contribute by putting pressure to our government to demand actions in order to achieve what is needed for reducing the emissions to achieve the Paris Agreement. Also, we can contribute by changing our lifestyle to a more sustainable way so that we can also help reduce the overall carbon footprint of our life. However, these actions take time. The ocean is like a big train, and the changing ocean is a moving train. Even though we press the brake right now, it will take some time for the train to stop. Meanwhile, we will be still seeing changes in the oceans and the impacts on fish stocks and fisheries. But there are local actions that we can implement to buy some time before these bigger scale carbon mitigation solutions can take their effect. We know that by maintaining good habitat, restoring coastal vegetation, reducing or eliminating overfishing, and mitigating pollution, we can improve the overall status of the ecosystem and fish stocks. This will add capacity of the fish stocks and marine ecosystems to adapt and respond to the changing ocean. The ocean is indispensable for our planet and society. By elucidating how climate change is impacting our oceans, marine life, and human well-being, I hope my research can help illuminate solutions and the need for their implementations to solve this global change challenge. Thank you very much.